Hello everyone, welcome to our lecture on deontological ethics. So we have studied already virtue ethics and natural law theory as two of the normative ethical theories in our course that we are uh, looking into, as they are fundamental normative ethical theories. The third is deontological ethics. Okay. So deontological ethics is closely associated to the moral philosophy of Immanuel Kant, German philosopher from the 18th century. So the term deon comes from the is a Greek word which means a duty. That's why deontological ethics is sometimes called duty ethics. Okay, so who was Immanuel Kant? Who is Immanuel Kant? Kant is an influential philosopher from the 18th century. He is famously known as the founder of the philosophical doctrine called transcendental idealism. Okay, this is the study of the conditions that make knowledge possible. So in one of the works of Kant, this book, The Critique of Pure Reason, Kant is mainly interested in establishing the foundation of knowledge. Okay? What are the conditions that make knowledge possible? Okay, that's his breakthrough in the study of knowledge. That's why he is a very important thinker. Also, in ethics or moral philosophy, okay, he established a philosophical science that elaborates the universal principles of morality. So Kant's moral philosophy is well elaborated in his second critique called The Critique of Practical Reason. But actually the main features of his moral thinking was already laid down in his work entitled The Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. So this work serves as the backbone of Immanuel Kant's moral philosophy, okay, of his normative ethical theory known as deontological ethics. Okay, so let us go into the main features of Kant's deontology. In the very first line of the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, Kant says, and I quote, "It is impossible to think of anything at all in the world, or indeed even beyond it, that could be considered good without limitation, except a good will." Okay. So Kant says it is only goodwill that exists as good without limitation or without qualification. Meaning to say, goodwill is good without any conditions, without any limitations, so to speak. But what makes a goodwill good? Okay. Kant says, and I quote, "A goodwill is not good because of what it effects or accomplishes, because of its fitness to attain some proposed end, but only because of its volition. That is, it is good in itself, and, regarded for itself, is to be valued incomparably higher than all that could merely be brought about by it in favor of some inclination, and indeed, if you will, of the sum of all inclinations." End of quote. For Kant, goodwill is not good because of the effects that it produces. Goodwill is not good because of its being suitable to some proposed and hoped for effect or goal. Okay? Rather, goodwill is good because in itself it is in its act of willing itself. Okay, it is in itself good. Okay, For example, you might say a medical worker giving medical aid to patients is an act of goodwill. But let us say a medical patient's goal in giving medical aid to patients is to earn profit out of it. Then that is not goodwill, okay? Because the medical worker simply does the act of giving medical aid to patients for another end that he wants to attain, which is to earn profit. In that case, it is not goodwill. Okay. However, if a medical worker gives medical aid to patients, even if he does not get anything out of it, then that is goodwill. Or if he does it for no other reason but simply to help, okay, patients who need medical assistance, then that is goodwill. Okay, what manifests goodwill? How is goodwill shown or manifested? Okay. For Kant, an action done for the sake of duty is what manifests goodwill. Okay. Mean to say, if someone does something for the sake of duty, then his action manifests or shows goodwill. When you do something for duty, you do not do it for some hoped for effect, or you do not do it because you want to achieve something else. You do something because it is your duty to do it. As simple as that. And in that case, your action manifests goodwill. So therefore, what follows here is that the moral worth of an action comes from its being done for the sake of duty. Okay? Kant says, and I quote, "An action from duty has its moral worth not in the purpose to be attained by it, but in the maxim in accordance with which it is decided upon, and therefore does not depend upon the realization of the object of the action, but merely upon the principle of volition, in accordance with which the action is done without regard for any object of the faculty of desire. Duty is the necessity of an action from respect for law." Okay. Meaning to say, if you do something for the sake of duty, you acknowledge that there is a certain law that commands you to do something, and you do something in respect. You do something for the sake of respecting that law. Okay. Duty is doing something that is necessary from out of respect from law, respect for law rather. So from this, it follows that actions done from certain inclinations and self-interest have no moral worth. If you have your own interests, you have other motives in doing something other than doing it for the sake of duty, your action has no moral worth. Only actions done for the sake of duty have moral worth. Okay. For example, you consider studying as good. Okay. But then, if your goal in studying is simply to pass this subject, because I need this subject to finish my studies, I need to pass this subject to finish my studies, then you are just doing the act of studying for the sake of something else. But if you study out of your respect for the duty that as a student you must study, then your action has moral worth. However, there are actions that conform with duty but are not necessarily done for the sake of duty. These actions have no moral worth. So you say, I will study because I will pass the subject if I study hard. So you do actually study, but then when you do that, your action, although conforms with duty, but you did not do it necessarily for the sake of duty. In that case, your action still has no moral worth. Okay. So Kant here proceeds and tries to look into the principles that determines the will so as for it to be absolutely good. Okay. Kant says that it is the representation of the law in itself, which only occurs in a rational being. That means a being possesses reason. Okay. It is what constitutes the preeminent good, which we call moral. Okay. And if a rational being or if a person, okay, wills something in conformity with this representation of law, okay, then the person is doing something which has moral worth. Okay. But what kind of law must the will follow so as to be absolutely good? Kant says the law that the will must follow so as to be absolutely good is one which is universal. Okay, universal law. Okay, and this will be made clear when we go into the so-called categorical imperative, okay, formulated by Immanuel Kant. But what is this representation of law? Kant says, and I quote, "The representation of an objective principle, insofar as it is necessitating for a will, is called a command of reason, and the formula of the command is called an imperative. All imperatives are expressed by an ought, and indicate by this the relation of an objective law of reason to a will that by its subjective constitution is not necessarily determined by it." Okay, end of quote. So this representation of law or representation of an objective principle in a rational being is called a command of reason. So a rational being possesses reason, as we said, and a rational being is aware of certain laws, okay, moral laws, and these practical moral laws, okay, appear to reason as a representation of that law, and this representation of that law occurs in reason as in the form of a command, okay, or in other words, what you call an imperative. Okay. Imperative and command are synonymous terms. So all imperatives or all commands are expressed by an ought. Okay. Another word for ought is a must or a should. Okay. And this ought, okay, is indicated by the relation of this objective law of reason or this command of reason to a will that by its subjective constitution is not necessarily determined by it. So reason presents to the will this command. Okay. The will, although subjectively constituted, meaning it is exposed to certain inclinations, okay, and other motives, although that is how the will's constitution, the will still is not determined by this command of reason, because otherwise it would not be a will. The will simply is the capacity to act in conformity to the representation of law. In other words, the capacity to act in conformity with a command of reason. So if the will is determined already in the first place, then it is not a will. So there is reason, which presents to the will this command, and it is the will which acts in conformity with this command. Okay. However, for Kant, these commands, or again what we call imperatives, there are two kinds, okay, according to Kant. One is hypothetical imperative, the other one is categorical imperative. First, the hypothetical imperative represents the practical necessity of an action as a means to achieving something else that one wills or desires. For example, the command which says, you must study hard if you want to pass this subject. Okay. So, studying in this imperative, studying is necessary if you only want to pass this subject. So there's a condition. Okay, and if there's a condition, then you call it a hypothetical command or a hypothetical imperative. Okay, so take note, the action that is deemed necessary in this example, which is studying hard, only becomes necessary because you want to achieve something else that you desire, which is, in this example, passing this subject. On the other hand, there is the categorical imperative. This represents a practical necessity of an action deemed necessary in itself and not for the sake of other ends. For example, you have the command, you must study hard. So, a categorical imperative expresses a command that is necessary in itself. Meaning to say, this command must be done in whatever circumstance. So the imperative is absolute and unconditional, unlike the hypothetical imperative, which has a condition. Now, Kant says that the principles of morality should be founded on categorical imperatives and not on hypothetical imperatives. So therefore, the principles for right action are always absolute and unconditional in whatever circumstance we may find ourselves in. We should follow these commands always. And in fact, for Kant, in morality, there is only one categorical imperative which has different formulations. So what are these formulations? First, the formula of universality, or the formula of a universal law of nature. It says, and I quote, act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. What is a maxim? A maxim is a subjective principle expressing a general truth or rule of conduct. So when you're about to do something, you formulate a maxim first, and then this maxim is what expresses the command of reason, which also presents a proposal on what you should do. So what does the formula of universality command rational beings to do? This commands that every maxim someone acts on must be such that others are willing to make it the case. That is, each and all can, will, and must do the same act as commanded by the maxim. Okay, so when you are about to do something, always try to consider formulating a maxim first, and find out for yourself if that maxim could be rationally applicable to all rational beings. Meaning to say, are others willing to make it the case? Are others willing to make it to do the same thing? Okay, as commanded by reason. Let's take an example. Consider Robin Hood. I presume you all know the famous story of Robin Hood. Robin Hood is famous for, according to legends, stealing money from the rich in order to help the poor. Okay. Now, the act in question here is stealing money. Now we say, well, Robin Hood's action is justifiable because although he does something bad, he does it for a good motive. Okay. Out of good motives, he does it. But then, if we consider the formula of universality, okay, consider the act of stealing, can we make the act of stealing, can we propose a maxim that compels everyone to steal in order to help those who are needy? Can we imagine a world in which every rational agent would want to do that? Okay, can we make it as a universal principle that everyone should steal money from the rich to help the poor? Okay, I guess not. And if the maxim that you propose, okay, fails the test of universality, then for Kant, your action that is commanded by the maxim has no moral worth. But if the maxim that you propose passes the test of universality, then your action has moral worth. That is the formula of universality. The second formula is called the humanity formula, or the formula of the end. Again, it is the same categorical imperative, which has different formulations. So the second is humanity formula. It says, and I quote, "So act that you use humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means." End of quote. What does this mean? For Kant, rational nature is an end in itself. So, a rational being possesses reason. So therefore, a rational being is an end in itself. As a rational being, a person or a human being has the capacity to act in conformity with the representation of law. And this holds for all rational beings. And we humans are rational beings. This is the basis for the moral worth or dignity of a person. So Kant provides here certain rational principles which serve as basis for human dignity or moral worth of persons. As such, a person should not treat himself or any other person as a means to attain certain ends, because this would reduce him and others to mere objects. Okay? It would reduce persons to mere things. Okay? And that would be a violation against their moral worth or dignity. Simply stating, this principle is the formal expression of the notion of respect for a person. Okay. And Kant here provides a very he provides a rational demonstration that there is a universal principle that commands us to respect each person because of their nature as rational beings. Last formula is called the autonomy formula. This is the idea of the will of every rational being as a will giving a universal law, quote unquote. Okay, this means that man's inherent moral worth is founded on his rational nature. Because as man has reason, he has the capacity to act in conformity with certain laws. And the rational nature of a human being also makes him a giver of universal laws, not just a mere follower of them. So human beings, as rational beings, they do not just simply follow rules or moral rules. They are in fact the ones who legislate these rules. They are the ones who create, so to speak, these rules. Because rational beings are self-legislating. As such, a person, by virtue of his will, is the one who creates the universal moral principles that he himself follows. This commands a person to act in such a way that through his maxims he becomes the legislator of universal laws. Okay, so that makes you responsible, a responsible agent, because you are not simply following the rules, you are in fact the one who is making the rules. Okay, that's the autonomy formula. Again, all these formulations express one the same imperative, the categorical imperative, and for Kant this is the ultimate basis of morality, and that is the deontological ethics of Immanuel Kant.